Hey guys, I wanted to do a video about precipitation. Precipitation types, different forms of precipitation, which might seem obvious, but there are some things that are maybe not so obvious about it. So let's just start. Here we have a picture of rain. Of course, rain is obviously a form of precipitation, and even little kids would know that. But just keep in mind, rain comes in different sizes and forms, although we call it all rain. So we could have heavy pounding rains, we could have light kind of misting rains, and like in this picture here, but we certainly all call it rain, right? So we have rain, but not all rain is exactly the same, and we certainly have different amounts of rainfall in different places. And here we can see the flooding during the monsoon seasons in India, tremendous amounts of rain in short periods of time. Then we have snow, and of course snow is a form of precipitation too. And we have varying types of snow and varying amounts, of course. In English, we just call it all snow. But in other languages, they have different names for the different types of snow. Some snow is very soft and fluffy. Some snow is more icy and hard and packed. And we have a wide variety of snow forms. In English, we call it all snow. But in other cultures, they have very specific names for the different types of snow that they get. Here we can see a picture. I believe this is Japan. Tremendous amount of snow. I believe this was all out of one storm. And here we can see, if you look at the pointer here, the snow is up to the second stories on these buildings. So tremendous snowfall. Most people think of Japan and they probably think of it being very warm and tropical. And that's true in parts of Japan, but certainly not in the mountains of Japan. In the mountains of Japan, it can get very, very cold, very, very snowy. Here's a picture of a no parking sign buried in snow. This is very typical of Western New York. And one of the things we'll talk about in a later video is that Western New York gets a tremendous amount of lake effect snow. And that's something you might have heard of before. We don't see lake effect snow. It's a phenomenon associated with the Great Lakes. We're just too far away from the Great Lakes to experience that. But cities like Buffalo, Rochester, that are close to the Great Lakes, get higher snowfall totals, and it's not uncommon to see things like stop signs and street signs buried in snow. I lived out there for a short period of time and would see this. And it would be kind of funny walking down the sidewalk, because you'd basically be walking down the sidewalk, and there would be often a wall of snow on either side of you. Very, very high snowfalls, higher than we would certainly have in this area. Here we can see trees covered in snow. I believe this is in Scandinavia, Norway or perhaps Finland, I don't remember. Here's New York City in a snowstorm. This is pretty typical for what we would expect to see in our general region. We of course get snow. It's unusual when we get more than a foot, or especially over 2 feet. But we certainly have had some significant storms that have disrupted travel. In the Rocky Mountains, very deep snow, of course. They could get snows 7-8 feet. In the mountains, they sometimes use these large snowblower trains to clear the train tracks so that trains can get through the Rockies. Here we have some snow sculptures. These are out in China, I believe, or were out in China. Of course, they don't last very long, but these are enormous sculptures carved out into the snow. And interesting form of art. It's temporary, of course, because eventually it'll melt. And you can see the size of the people and the size of these sculptures. Very, very large. So we have rain and snow, and that's what most people think of when they think of precipitation. We also have hail. Hail is technically a form of precipitation too. And in our part of the world, we don't encounter hail too often. Many of you have probably been in hailstorms at some point, but probably not with hail this size. And here we can see what are called hailstones. The little pieces of hail are called hailstones, almost the size of baseballs. And there's the baseball to give you a sense of scale. So hail can get very, very large. It often has this kind of a spiky appearance to it as it's melting on the way down from the upper levels of the atmosphere. Hail is kind of interesting because it's a warm weather event. And if you imagine yourself in a real hailstorm, it was probably during a thunderstorm. We usually see hail during a thunder and lightning storm, and we rarely have thunder and lightning in the winter. So hail is a warm weather phenomena. We usually encounter it during severe thunderstorms, which usually happen in the spring and summer. it would be very unusual to have real, true hail in the wintertime. And I say rare, real and true because a lot of the time people mix up hail with sleet, which is a wintertime situation. We'll talk about sleet in a minute. But in the wintertime, we get those little ice pellets coming down that maybe bounce off your jacket. That's a different thing. You hear it bouncing off the roof and so on. That forms in a very different way. But true hail forms out of severe thunderstorms, severe weather. It's associated with rain, thunder, lightning, and we usually experience that during warm weather. Maybe April through even August, or even September maybe. But it's a warm weather event usually. We occasionally get hail. And when we do, it's usually about the size of maybe peas to the size of a marble, and it melts pretty quickly. There was one time I was stuck in a pretty significant hailstorm, and the hail was maybe about the size of ping pong balls, and it actually dented up the hood of my pickup truck at the time a little bit. Here we have really big hailstones. This would be very unusual in the Northeast, but this is much more common in the Midwestern states. The state that leads the nation in hail, number of hailstorms, and the size of the hailstones would be, I believe it's Nebraska. But the Midwest, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, Tornado Alley essentially is known for severe weather that produces tornadoes, and a common association with tornadoes is these large hailstones, although that isn't always the case. We could certainly have large hail without tornadoes, but sometimes during big tornadoes we get big hail, but we don't have to. So out in the Midwest, we often get these large hailstones. They cause tremendous destruction. They'll smash the windshields of cars. A lot of economic destruction from big hail. Imagine a car dealership. All the cars are parked outside, brand new cars. We would get smashed up. Every car would be probably totaled in the dealership. These large hailstones will destroy crops, level cornfields and other economic crops and so on, which are so important to the Midwest. So hail can cause a lot of economic destruction. It's not something we really think about too much in the Northeast, but we do get hail very rarely of this size. What we do get a lot of is sleet. And sleet is different from hail. Sleet is a wintertime phenomena, so we're talking about winter now. And in this case, we're talking about those little ice pellets that come down from the sky. They bounce off the rooftops. You might be in your bedroom and you hear it kind of bouncing off the roof. If you're outside, it bounces off your jacket, and you hear that kind of like pinging sound as it's bouncing off surfaces. The sleet is small. It rarely gets much bigger, than maybe a few millimeters across. It's small. It certainly isn't going to hurt anybody. It's not directly destructive. It could, of course, make roads slippery and cause treacherous road conditions, but it directly will not cause damage from falling on objects, but it certainly makes things slippery. We also get a lot of, here's another picture of sleet slush, and we see a lot of these kind of storms where we live. Very common. We'll talk about how they form in a few minutes. Here's some pictures of sleet, these tiny little ice pellets. And sometimes even adults will say, oh, it's hailing outside, or they refer to this as hail. But hail comes out of severe weather, thunderstorms, lightning, and are those large hailstones that we see coming down from the sky during warm weather. Sleet is a wintertime situation. We would never see sleet in the summer, at least where we live. And we get these tiny little ice pellets that come down. They accumulate on the ground. They bounce off our jackets, rooftops, and so on. We also have freezing rain. Freezing rain and sleet are often mixed up. They're similar but different. Sometimes they occur simultaneously. It takes just a very slight difference in air temperature to mean the difference between freezing rain and sleet. Freezing rain occurs when the ground and the surfaces near the ground are just a little bit below freezing. The precipitation falls as rain, and we have rain, but because the ground is below freezing, that rain freezes on contact with the surfaces. And we can see here some power lines that are completely coated in ice. The rain fell onto those cold power lines and created this frozen layer, and we can see all these icicles here. Freezing rain can be a very destructive type of storm, and sometimes the most destructive storms are actually ice storms, freezing rain, because water is, of course, very heavy, and all of these icicles accumulate and create a tremendous amount of weight on the power lines and eventually can cause them to snap and break. It also coats tree branches and causes a lot of downed trees and a lot of power outages, and of course makes the roads dangerous to travel on too. When I was a kid, I was in high school at the time, there was the great ice storm of 1998, and we had a storm, I think it might have even been in March, but we had this freezing rainstorm, and you can see these high tension lines, these big power towers, these big high tension, high voltage towers, just came crumbling down all the way from New York to Quebec. And this caused massive power outages. We had a tremendous amount of icing. And I remember the ice was so thick, I was actually able to put ice skates on and ice skate in my driveway at my parents' house when I was a kid. We were out of power for close to a week, and that meant that school was closed for a full week, which was really fun, until we had to go to school longer at the end of the year to make up for it. But we were off for the entire time. We lost power, though, and unless you have a wood stove, a wood-burning stove or something like that, it means you're probably not going to have a furnace, too. So things got a little cold and uncomfortable after a while. And here we can see more damage from freezing rain. So freezing rain accumulates on the lines and makes things very heavy, causes poles to snap, causes trees to bend over and snap and break, and makes travel very difficult. Here we can see a little strand of barbed wire with several inches of ice accumulated on it. And again, all of that water is very heavy, causes down branches, power outages, and so on. Here you can see just a little blade of grass with about 2 inches of ice attached to it. So as that rain falls, it freezes on contact with even blades of grass and other surfaces, and gets very thick, very heavy, causes power outages and massive destruction. Here's some more grass or weeds, and you can see all of that thick ice built up on its surface. And here we can see more of that too. We have all of these trees bending over because of the weight of all that ice again. So that's freezing rain. Here we have a situation similar to freezing rain, and actually this picture is very famous. It's kind of a funny one. It's not exactly the direct result of freezing rain, but temperatures were below freezing on this day, and these poor individuals happened to park their cars too close to one of the Great Lakes. And it was a very windy day, and you can see up here all of the ice. The waves were splashing up onto the cars and into the trees, and that water was freezing due to the below freezing temperatures. There's no way to drive these vehicles. I mean, we're talking about inches of ice. You would probably break your car trying to get into it. And really, you just have to wait for things to thaw out. One of my favorite parts of this picture is this part right here. That's actually the car's antenna, coated in probably about 8 inches of ice or so. So this freezing rain, even though this isn't exactly freezing rain, it's similar in process, creates a lot of problems, can make thick coatings and add a lot of weight. Now I set up some y-axes here, but I think we'll do this in the next video. So why don't we stop here for now, and then we'll talk about freezing rain, sleet, rain and snow in a graphical way in the next video, which will be shorter, just a few minutes long. So I'll be back on and we'll make a short video about graphing precipitation types. Okay, so that's all for now. We'll do a short video on graphing precipitation types in a few minutes.